Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today we want to return to the subject of the UGreen DXP NAS series, now rebranded by the brand as the NASync series of devices. And this video is kind of going to be broken up into two halves. The first half of the video is going to be me talking a little bit more about everything we've learned since the previous video when there were some early inklings on this product and indeed this whole series. And we're going to sort of talk about what to expect from this soon to be coming to Kickstarter, I might add more on that later. Series of NAS devices that once again is trying to challenge the existing status quo held in the market by turnkey NAS solutions. The second half of this video is going to be us deep diving a little bit more into those specifications because, and let's be frank about this, of all the devices that we've seen roll out onto the scene from either new upcoming brands or seeing a lot of crowdfunding going along in the world of private hosted NAS servers, I'll tell you right now, I've never seen a brand roll out an entire series on crowdfunding. We've seen the odd product. We've talked before about the Zimmer Cube. We talked a little bit more about the Link Station series there, the Link Station N1 device from Link Plus. But UGreen, who have been knocking around for the better part of 10, 11, maybe 12 years, I think it's 2024. Woohoo! The time goes by. I will say right now, them bringing this out on crowdfunding has certainly made a few users sort of wonder why such an established brand would use crowdfunding. But moreover, it's such an ambitious proposal, not to roll out one or two NAS devices, but by my count, we're seeing here 6 different NAS solutions all at once. And right now you can go over to their official pages. I'm recording this on the 30th of January 2024. This might come out in a few days post-editing. And even though the crowdfunding campaign isn't available yet at the time of recording this, you can sign up for alerts for it and you can go to their own pages. And there's also on their official pages a kind of weird £5 deposit thing to get access. I'm not sure I like that at all. If you're watching this, UGreen, I'd either shut that down or explain what the hell that is. But let's talk about these devices. Now, they're actually spanning quite a wide range of solutions there. There's 2 bay, 2 different 4 bays, a 6 bay, an 8 bay, and a flash-only system built on NVMe. Now, the 2 bay device is arriving with the N100 processor. Same goes for the standard class 4 bay. These have been differentiated into the DXP 2800, the DXP 4800. Then you move up to the next tier, which is the DXP 4800 Pro and 6800 Pro. And then you go into the Plus series with the 8800 Plus. And then finally the DXP 480T, that flash solution there. So the non-Plus or Pro devices in that 2 and 4 bay format, they arrive with the Intel N100 processor, a CPU we have already talked about here on the channel. Again, we've seen a lot of Topton boards. We've seen some of those custom AliExpress boards arrive on the scene with this new Intel, I'll say new 2023 generation Intel CPU there. That's when Intel kind of shut the door on Pentium and Celeron branded processors and gone down this N100, N300 and lots of other new naming conventions with their processors there. The N100 has a very low base level power clock speed there, but it is a quad core 4-thread processor there. And I will add that CPU actually bursts pretty high when you need it as well. Now, the 4800 Pro 4 bay is one of the only ones of all of these solutions that has its own CPU. They've gone for an Intel Pentium Gold processor, which I think was a weird choice, because whenever I've seen Pentium-based NAS systems, notwithstanding the N6005 processor we saw on a lot, again, of those Topton boards, and those of the like, the CWWK NAS solutions, this is a kind of a weird one. It's a 5-core, 6-thread processor, the 8505, glancing at my notes there, and this CPU, you know, it's pretty beefy, I'd say, also with a base level TDP, I think of 15 watts, it can go up pretty darn high, 45, 55, we'll double check that in the second half of the video. It's kind of the outlier, and I'm not quite certain why that product exists. But moving forward from that, we go on the Pro and the Plus 6 and 8 bay tier. That is when we start to see the beefier CPU. That Intel i5 processor there, and it's the i5-1235U, a CPU that we saw. That's CPU, by the way, that family on the Ying boards. We talked about the Ying i9 board in December with our John Spo N3 build. This CPU is pretty beefy. We're seeing a lot of these big chunky kind of Intel Core more than anything processors, and AMD as well with their Ryzen series. scaling down to these mobile SoC processors. And this Intel i5, it's a 10-core, 12-thread processor there that's actually surprisingly beefy for such a scaled-down direct-to-board CPU. And that CPU, by the way, is utilised across both the Pro Series 6 bay, the Plus Series 8 bay, and that flash-only system there. Accompanying these CPUs alongside that is 8 gig of DDR5 memory across the board. Every single solution in this makeup has got that. Not strictly ECC, but it is on die ECC, ODECC associated with DDR5 there, which is good to see that there is support of that on there. And again, that is across the board from what I can see. Obviously, the differing CPUs result in a differing peak memory potential there. So, for example, in the entry-level devices there, the 2 and the 4s, it's up to a maximum 16 gig of memory. And when you go to the larger devices, it goes up to an impressive 64 gig of DDR5 memory supported there. Now, that's kind of the base nuts and bolts hardware. If we go onto the system disk, because we're going through the specification from the official site there, I will say there's clearly a disparity there with the way these are being approached for that software. This is the UGOS Pro or UGOS NAS software this is arriving with. There's also a standalone NAS application for your phone for iOS and Android they're promoting there, known as NASync app. Again, it's going to have the usual stuff in there, file management, system management there. There's also talk on there about AI-supported AI photo recognition there and AI-powered searches across the system. Again, we don't know enough about the system software yet to really deep dive into that. This is predominantly a focus on the hardware. But when it comes to the internal storage for that OS, it's a huge difference between them. So on the beginning class systems there, it's a 16 gig eMMC small storage device inside there. Again, most NAS devices, with the exception of TerraMaster, tend to arrive with the eMMC little micro storage area in there. And this is just a simple 16 gig storage. But when you go to the larger devices, they've clearly scaled up to a traditional SSD inside, arriving at 128 gig each. And that's again for the 6 and the 8 and that NVMe flash system there. Now, when it comes to the storage, as mentioned, we've got the 2, we've got the 4, we've got the 6, we've got the 8, we've got the flash system there. With the exception of the flash, that's all SATA storage there, and they've all got access to M2 NVMe. So whether it's the 2 or the 4 bay, although you've got your storage hard drive base, you've also got a couple of M2s. Obviously, that CPU, depending on whether you go for the M100 or you're going to go for the i5 revisions of these systems, the M2 NVMe PCI speeds or the bandwidth afforded is going to differ. They're going to be Gen 3 on the N100. The jury's still out, I would say, on what the lane speed and bandwidth afforded to that Pentium model, because that isn't all alike, and they may be being creative with the lanes, bifurcation, that sort of thing. So we're not going to confirm on that one, but we can be moderately certain that the M2 NVMe lanes afforded alongside the SATA storage bay to the 6 and the 8 bay are going to be Gen 4. There may be Gen 3 to scale things down, but again, it's more likely than not there'll be Gen 4 there. And of course, the flash system has no SATA base at all. It is just the M2 NVMe. 4 M2 NVMe's, it's an incredibly compact system. I would argue as small as a mini PC from what I've seen there, like that B-Link device that we looked at the early stages of January 2024. Port connections, input, output is actually pretty impressive across the board. They've all got SD card slots with the exception of the 2 bay from what I can see. So having an SD card slot is something that really was popular in 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, and then for no reason the majority of NAS brands removed it. I don't know if it was just the the dividing and dedicating a little bit of the lane to that M2 NVMe, but frankly I am disappointed that it's taken until 2024 for suddenly people to wake up and go, actually SD card slots were pretty useful, and if you're a content creator for video or photos, it's going to be doubly impressive there. Again, the majority of these systems all have SD card slots there. They've all got USB 3.2 Gen 2 10 gig connections there, but then after that, and of course HDMI outputs as well, which scale in their afforded visual bandwidth once you go for the more powerful systems. On their own charts, they call it 4K and 8K, but frankly, it's going to be a question of HDMI 1.4, 2.0, 2.1, etc. But I'll say the rest of the connections do differ quite wildly. The 2-bay standard class system there, the DXP there, arrives with a single 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port, which is pretty disappointing given that N100 processor. But once you scale up to the 4-bay and the 4-bay Pro, that's when you start to see not only 2 times 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports, but you also see a 10 GBE enter the field of play. And once you go for the 6, the 8, the flash, these arrive with 2 times 10 gigabit Ethernet network ports there. Mwah, lovely stuff. But then moreover from that, once you look again at the 6 and the 8 and the 6-bay, the 8-bay and that flash system, you got Thunderbolt 4 as well. Now again, I'm going to hold off any kind of assertion of whether that's just going to be with the NAS acting as the host and any Thunderbolt device like a USB storage device being a client, or the potential for network connectivity. When we looked at the Zimmer Cube NAS from Ice Whale, they were talking about their Thunderbolt 4 system, which, by the way, this motherboard is incredibly similar. We will go into that another time. I'll say right now, their Thunderbolt, they are ascertaining, Zimmer Cube, that those Thunderbolt ports are going to be network usable as well. Again, I've yet to see that. That's still very much on their roadmap rather than something we've actually visibly seen. So UGreen have yet to confirm if these Thunderbolt ports are going to be host client, or they're going to be a little bit mix of the both to allow you to use the network connectivity as well, such as found in a QNAP system. But so nonetheless, it's great to have them there. And finally, the 6 and the 8-bay system actually have an additional PCIe slot as well. It looks like it's a ×4 speed slot. There's nothing huge to write home about there, but even across the whole thing, there's still a fantastic makeup of hardware resources being presented here on a product, once again, remember, is going through crowdfunding. So let's talk about that for a second before we dig into those specs a little bit more. Why have they gone down the crowdfunding route? As I mentioned earlier on in the video, they have been around for more than a decade. Why is a brand established for a decade with an established supply chain, established reputation, products that have mentioned on some of the biggest marketing and social media platforms out there, why do they need to go down the Kickstarter route, the crowd supply route, the Indiegogo route? Well, and we've got another video coming up on this, but in brief, it's actually quite advantageous for a company an established company to use crowdfunding to promote a product. We've seen established names in the movie and showbiz space. We've seen it in the gaming space, where despite the size of a company, sometimes it's just a very useful way to, one, gauge interest in a product or idea without committing a lot of resources to it. 2, and this applies a lot more specifically to, I would argue, Chinese brands and a lot of the Eastern brands out there that do not have the connections and the pathways with regard to the distribution and marketing as Western, and that connection between the Western and the Eastern markets. A lot of the time, crowdfunding platforms can be used as a marketing machine where they don't need to go to the trouble of using a lot of third-party marketing executives and organizations, where they can just put their product on crowdfunding and let the crowdfunding platform do the distribution, do the marketing, do the social sharing. How good that is and the commitment the crowdfunding platform has to make is up for debate. We're talking about this currently with the Storaxa campaign, where a lot of users feel that they have been burnt by that campaign, and the level of support afforded to them by the crowdfunding organisations themselves, in that case Kickstarter, is negligible. Again, do check out the video we've made on that, as well as a lot of the articles linked, and I recommend you do check out the Storaxa Kickstarter campaign page. Go to the comment and you'll see what I mean. Ultimately, there are going to be pros and cons going for a product like this on crowdfunding. I can't recommend that you do that. That is really a decision for you. I will say, again, this does look like a brand that has been established for a long time. It's a very ambitious range of products all to be rolled out at the same time. I kind of thought they'd maybe go for 1 or 2, and then the second phase introduce others, not just boom, all of them at once. But looking at these specifications and seeing these specs already being rolled out on things like the Zimmer Cube, something you can probably hear in the background there, a product that has not finished crowdfunding, but I've at least seen the physical item that it can exist, leaves me with a tiny degree of hope. But let's deep dive into those specifications just a wee bit there, to sort of talk about, because we can't get the price point here, but we want to know really the capabilities and whether this is going to be worth your time. So again, if you've only come for the vague specs and the overview of this in case you were thinking about going for it, thanks for watching. But for the rest of you, let's crack on with the laptop and deep dive those specs just a wee bit. Okay, so let's get our hands dirty a little bit here. Again, I apologise for any repetition and referring to stuff earlier in the first half of the video, but I think it's important that we dig into it just a wee bit more. Now, at the moment, as mentioned, this is the 30th of Jan, and they've not made that particular crowdfunding campaign live yet. But I will say they have done a decent amount of marketing and promo up to this point. So, for example, here they were present at CES with a pretty significant booth. Again, if you've ever looked at the cost of, hosting something at a trade show, it is not cheap. And they had quite a prominent stand. I wasn't there at CES, but they showed off the works with little speeches there all the way through, and it was prominent on a lot of different channels showing off this DXP series. So, again, this isn't a company we're talking about now that has kind of appeared out of the blue and no one's really heard of them. They were kind of throwing the money around there and showing that their product was prominent alongside all the other stuff that we talked about that they kind of are releasing over the last few years. But as mentioned earlier on, all of that, seriously, UGreen, this thing can go do one. This whole idea of paying $5 to get access to the early prices when it launches on Kickstarter? No. Again, no one do that thing. It makes no sense to me. But if you go to the official pages there and you go through a lot of what they're talking about, there is a lot of the usual kind of schmoozy paid stuff there going all the way through. And they do talk a lot more about the software. But again, it's utilizing those videos where it's just lots, almost stock level footage, but it's not. Again, we need to learn more about the software before really getting behind this product. But when it comes to the hardware there, I will say straight away, going down, I kind of like what we're seeing. Oh, I didn't even mention it earlier in the video. It does look like they've got some neat new trays going inside there. But once we really break down into those specifications that we discussed already, we can really dig into those CPUs. So that entry-level CPU that we just mentioned there, that N100, again, not a bad little CPU. There's a reason why a lot of your systems that you're going to see releasing in the affordable prosumer mid-tier space there are going to arrive with this. Probably one of the most appealing factors is there. It's very power efficient. Again, with a 6-watt rated TDP, and again, that is switchable when you've seen that on a lot of mini PCs rocking out with the M100. It's got a power switch, 3-layer power switch there that can allow a lot of flexibility in that power consumption, but it's still got a decent high clock speed if you need it. The same goes when you're looking at the integrated graphics there. 750 megahertz for a burst speed is actually fairly normal. If you look at the M5105 or even the N6005, both of those CPUs there have a burst clock speed of around that 750 to 850 megahertz and a base level at around 350 to 400 megahertz there, but it's still very good, and presumably that is going to be an entry-level price product as well. Again, as mentioned, we're looking at a Gen 3 system there. It'd be nice to learn more about the lane allocation to this particular device here, because again, when we look at things like the Zimmer Cube, something we talked about already on the channel, they're more recent updates, and again, we are comparing an established campaign against a not yet launched campaign, so we do have to be fair. I will highlight they've actually been quite detailed about the lane allocation on both the CPUs they're utilizing, so it wouldn't surprise me if we're going to see something not dissimilar here when we look at the launch of the UGreen system there. So I'm going to put a link to that Zimmer Cube there, because I'm not even sure you can back it anymore anyway. If you can, good for you, but otherwise, there's actually some reasonable resources there that might be used as guidelines, perhaps, towards what the UGreen system is going to be. But heading back into that CPU, we can see 9 lanes to play with there at Gen 3. And pretty much everything that we've already discussed earlier in the video. But where things get really interesting is that Pentium Gold processor. The Pentium Gold we talked about there, again, it's part of the Alder Lake series there, and you go down, again, 5 cores, Wierd. And it's going to be a question of those power versus efficiency cores, something that changed around about 2018, 2019 with CPUs, which had multi-cores, actually had variable cores. And that's what we're seeing here, where it is a question of 4 efficiency cores and a power core when needed. But still, 6 threads, kind of odd, presumably, laying down across the power core divided by 2. But that, as you can see, is another CPU that has variable power rates from 50 to 55, meaning that when needed, this can be efficient. How much that OS that they're including with this, whether the baseline OS or just the system backend itself can take advantage of efficiency modes, perhaps a scheduling, we can't confirm. But if you're going to have that CPU that has got variable power modes, it'd be nice to be able to kind of harness it in some shape or form. But again, this is a CPU that bursts up to 64 gig. And if we go back to the official pages for this product, we can see that that 4-bay Plus series there supports up to 64 gig, which is great. This is going to be a weird little outlier, and it arrives again with 110 GBE and the 2.5 GBE. It just lacks that Thunderbolt connection there at the bottom. So I think this is probably going to be the more popular prosumer choice in the middle. But again, they've got guideline pricing there at the top, but we're still yet to confirm whether that pricing is indeed Kickstarter launch pricing, or that's going to be the eventual rollout pricing there. Again, they do make a big point of saying secure 40% off. Pricing on this series, I would say, is acceptable. One of the criticisms we've had from other crowdfunding campaigns we talked about on the channel has been it's been too good to be true because it's been too cheap and not covering the cost of distribution, cost testing, and then devices R40 for replacement, logistics, stuff like that. And I would say the pricing for this is fairly acceptable. I would say we can see a breakdown there between the branded eventual launch price versus the Kickstarter price there, and I would say those prices are fairly acceptable. And normally there was a time a long time ago where I would have said a 4-bay dedicated flash system with an i5 and 10G 479 is just too darn cheap, down from 779. But it's, when we look at things like the Flash Store, when we look at things like that Kickstarter over there, I'm sorry, not that Kickstarter, this QNAP TBS system, the NAS book, that price is actually not out of the realms of Crazy Town. So pricing wise, I'm kind of happy with what we're seeing here. And again, when we look at that CPU there as well, when we go to the integrated graphics, we see it burst up to that 1.10 gigahertz there. And remember, that is a maximum burst graphical performance there, not base level. But still, nonetheless, very impressive numbers to see all the way through. And I think this is definitely going to be the outlier in terms of the CPU choices between these devices, because I've not seen this gold CPU being utilised generally outside of, say, QNAP devices on their prosumer 4 base, like the 7.4 series or even the 7.2 series before, which were some of the few devices using Pentium Gold processors in the turnkey NAS market. Now, we go to the last one, that i5, probably the CPU we've explored the most here on the channel. Again, 10 cores, 2 performance cores, 8 efficiency cores, and again, those 12 threads there. So we're seeing that differentiation, presumably of the power cores being separated there if need be across the threads. Again, 64 gig, lovely stuff there. The tail end of 2022 for this processor. Weirdly, the oldest CPU of the three, even though it's the most powerful. And I'd like to double check actually. Let's back up that statement, double check, because I've just said that. No, they're launched at the same time. I apologise. Again, that Iris Xe graphics there, when we were utilising the QNAP Thunderbolt system recently there, and the, let's bring it through, when we were looking at the QNAP TBS H574, this utilises that same CPU, and indeed, this arrives with a 10 GBE and 2.5 GBE. This system arrives with Thunderbolt front and back, and this system arrives with 5 NVMe slots, but they're Gen 3 times 2 because of the affording lanes and having to use the chipset lanes, the PCB. Put that there, PCH even. So going through this, again, a very impressive CPU for the scale of it, and as mentioned, it is a Gen 4. But as you can see, the PCH chipset revision, let's bring that up, being Gen 3. And it's going to be a question of whether those individual M2 NVMe lanes afforded to both the flash solution there at the top, the DXP 480T, and indeed these systems here, whether those M2 NVMe slots are going to be Gen 4 or Gen 3, because I think there's a high likelihood to be able to separate that amount of storage architecture that they're probably going to be Gen 3. But we'll have to wait and see. But ultimately, comparing the 3 CPUs, as you can see here, and we're going to do a full blown out article on NAScompares that covers all of this, if you'd rather read about it. The 3 CPUs for a rolling out NAS family is actually pretty darn impressive, frankly. I like that if this was not a Kickstarter, if this was not crowdfunding, this would be Johnny Big Bananas roll out, dick on the table, high end. This is what we are coming out with. It's just the fact that it's going on crowdfunding which sort of dilutes that point, because that's a lot of SKUs to maintain simultaneously. And although I would argue that this could be a Chinese brand that is just using the crowdfunding, or just in this case Kickstarter marketing machine to get easier, wider, broader global exposure, it's something I largely associate with much smaller brands, not a brand that has been around for 12 years. So it's sort of surprising they're going down this route, and again, especially to launch an entire product family all the way through. And harking back to that software, one of the things I'm really interested in seeing is how established that software is going to be when this crowdfunding campaign launches. I hate to keep harking back to the ZimmerCube there, but when the ZimmerCube first rolled out, for all of the good hardware that I saw on the prototype device they sent here to the channel, I'll say right now the software was nowhere near as evolved as it needed to be at launch. They were moving away from the light OS known as Casa OS onto a Zimmer OS, but now they've only just recently added RAID. That to me should have been a day one requirement on a larger scale system there with that OS, and they've only just rolled out RAID support on the beta of that software, and that device hasn't launched yet there. So one of the things UGreen I think could really stand to do when they do promote this device is talk a lot more about the software capabilities, not just harking over and over again about AI stuff, but certainly talking a lot more about the capabilities of that OS, rolling out features and functionalities such as RAID support there, Cloud Sync, NAS support, System OS backups, and a lot more about the file system. So all of that sort of stuff is something we hope to see once this campaign rolls out, to see if it's worthy of our time and interest. But again, I say this with every crowdfunded NAS, we are talking about crowdfunding. Even if it's a decade-old company or it's a company that's not been around that long, bear in mind we are talking about crowdfunding. And therefore, this is not like buying from your standard e-tailer. Keep that in mind. And again, as mentioned, I don't know what this is. But other than that, if I had to be pressed on this, I would say, with regards to this device, I'm pretty optimistic about this. UGreen is an established brand. They've really rolled out there with established media events. And they've provided a lot of the information early doors, long before the crowdfunding has began. But that's really it for everything we know right now about the UGreen NASync series of products. I'm quietly optimistic, if I'm honest. I'm not sure how I feel about them utilising crowdfunding to launch this particular product series. I kind of would have liked to have seen them launch it on their official platform. Perhaps even the non-Kickstarter discounted price be available via their retail outlet. That would have been quite nice. The ability to just be able to buy this product at the non-reduced price, but with the guarantees and the certainties that normal e-commerce would provide, chargeback, not being the money being deducted from you until the product is actually ready for delivery, just like you would from any e-tail outlet. But I would say right now, I am quietly optimistic. I think this is a possible product. I think these configurations are realistic. I think the pricing is a great deal more realistic than we've seen stuff out there. It's still weirdly low, but not as low as stuff we've seen out there. And no doubt when this does launch, there's going to be significant buzz following it because UGreen is an established brand. But let me know what you guys think in the comments about this campaign, this product, and ultimately whether you think this is going to be a success or not. Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. There's links in the description to all of the pages we talked about today, as well as other stuff on the DXP series. And no doubt we'll be talking about this again in one shape or form in the coming months. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.